is the first in a series of ACT science tests videos that Testive is putting out to help you get the highest score that you possibly can on the ACT science test. The present video is going to give you just a general overview of the entire section and provide you with some important strategies for success for any question you might encounter on the science test, but subsequent videos are going to be zeroing in on specific types of questions and how to approach those. What that means is this video is going to be very helpful for those that have no experience with the ACT science test as of now, and it's going to be providing some key insights for people that may have seen it before but are struggling with understanding how best to approach a test or how to think about it. So without further ado, welcome. Tonight marks the start of your journey toward mastering the ACT science test. This is Testive here, making space travel dreams come true, one student at a time. My name is Carlos Cousins. I'm a Testive coach, teacher, and at this point, ACT and college prep guru. The first thing we're going to be looking at is just a general understanding of how the test is structured, what the test is in a nutshell. The ACT science test is then a 40-question, 35-minute test, which means that you have less than a minute to answer all the questions that are provided. And if you look at what it's evaluating skills in data interpretation, comprehension of research summaries, recognizing and evaluating conflicting viewpoints on data, and experimental procedure. So this test is testing not only, well, because of what it's testing, you not only have to answer more questions than you have minutes to answer in the exam, but you also have to answer those questions in conjunction with reading data that will be provided for you, research summaries that will be given to you, blurbs on different scientists' viewpoints on different topics. So you'll have to read passages that the questions are going to be associated with, and you have to digest them, answer the questions, and finish a section in only 35 minutes. So it is a very rushed section. Well, there will be 7 of these passages of these ACT science essays, and each of them is going to be accompanied by a set of multiple questions that are going to be asking about specific data or statements in a passage sometimes, others about entire sections of the passage provided, others about the passage as a whole. This is much like the ACT reading test, if you're a little bit more familiar with that one. That means that it's going to look a lot like it, but then a little different. So what does this look like on Testive? So the Testive Science question will provide you with a question that is going to be in reference to the text provided. You can't really understand it without the text. If you read this one, according to the data in Table 1, if the mass of the ball is held constant and the number of ropes varies from 2 to 3, the forces on the ropes are dependent on. It's very difficult to, in fact, it's impossible to answer this question without having read the text before. And if you happen to know a lot about physics and have a very good idea of what this question is asking about, even then, if without looking at the data in Table 1, it's impossible to answer the question. So if you're not too comfortable with physics or with any other science topic that this test is tackling, don't feel like you're necessarily that far behind. The information that you need to answer the questions will always be provided for you on the exam, and on Testive we have the exact same format. We've got here some tabular and graphic material that you have to digest along with the text that's provided. And this question is asking about the table. Other questions will ask you about the graph or the text and specific portions of each. So just to be clear, why are we doing this? How does the ACT justify doing this? Or why does the ACT test this at all? If you know, the SAT doesn't test anything related to science per se. And well, what the ACT says is this isn't a test about rote recall of scientific facts. So it's not testing whether or not you know certain facts about science. It's definitely not testing your understanding of scientific theories or laws. And this isn't about showing off your AP Physics C or AP Bio skills entirely. And I say entirely here because if you know some basic science at, well, really the basics of any type of science at whichever level you're studying it, it will be easier to figure out what the graphs are telling you. You'll have more experience looking at problems of the sort, but really it will all be provided for you. Uh, the makers of the ACT say this science test can be boiled down to one basic skill, and that skill they call scientific reasoning. It turns out this skill is developed not really by necessarily being exposed to scientific problems. It's in large part just from familiarity with reading strategies that are necessary for doing well on any other section of the exam, though, with the exception of the math. And even then, you have word problems, and sometimes the questions are worded um, weirdly, and you need some of these skills to succeed in those. And to a lesser extent, the data interpretation strategies that you already need for mathematics. So you have the skills that you need to succeed for this test. If you feel more comfortable with reading, especially reading, and also math, it's not that different from what you've seen before. The problem is in the timing. Um, there are three ACT Science essay types. Like you saw earlier, one of those is data interpretation. And well, what does that mean? Data interpretation tests whether you can interpret and digest the graphic and tabular material provided, just like we saw on the example question. This is supposed to be the sort of text that you would find in scientific literature, academic journals, college level texts, etc. Also, it's supposed to be measuring whether or not you can interpret scatter plots, which is something that most high school students have seen multiple times since middle school. Um, Graph reading, again, graphs are something that most students are familiar with, though these are often far more complex than what you're used to. They're really just variations on things you've seen before, maybe things that haven't been introduced to you in math class, but were they to have been introduced in math class, you'd find very easy. And then just tables with information. You've seen this in your math classes your whole lives. This is something that's you have familiarity with. And this makes up 30 to 40% of the test. For some people, these are the hardest questions because the graphs and the tables look very complicated and they take a long time trying to digest the information provided there. For others, it turns out it's easier because there's less text and they have a more visual representation of what the essay is talking about. Well, then you also have research summaries, and these make up 45 to 55% of the test. So potentially more than half of your test will be just research summary questions. And these are going to be testing your ability to identify and interpret varying forms of experimental design. Experimental design is something that many students have been looking at since elementary school, uh, and that you should be used to evaluating. But identifying and interpreting it um, are two different things. You may be able to see, oh, well, this is an experiment, they're following a specific design, but interpreting why the experiment is being carried out and exactly what the purpose of each of the pieces of evidence that are being pulled out is a lot more like reading questions. So if you feel comfortable doing that, apply the same strategy that you use for the reading test here for the science test. And then the rest of the questions, a much smaller percentage, between 15 and 20% of the questions, are conflicting viewpoint questions. And these are going to be asking you to evaluate hypotheses and the relevance of data. Now, I just said a whole bunch of stuff. I got a quick question for you. Can you remember any of what I just said? And this is the problem with this test and really with this exam in general. You go to the ACT site and try to look up, what's in the test. It's very difficult for you to have an idea of what that actually looks like just from reading descriptions, and that's where Testive comes in. We have if you move right now, you're under the lessons page. If you move to the practice page and make sure that your knob at the top is switched to ACT, you'll see a whole bunch of ACT science questions that are going to be tackling these skills specifically, these types of questions specifically. So just important to note here, the ACT science test questions will test any number of the aforementioned skills and subskills at the same time. Yes, they're divided by different types of texts, but the skills that you need to answer questions for one type of text are usually useful for answering certain questions on other types of texts. Every multiple choice question, just so you remember, will have distractor options. So there will usually be at least one, sometimes two answer choices that are very, very obviously not the right answer. And well, it's best to develop a familiarity with each ACT science test skill by doing ACT Science test questions targeting those skills, which is why we have the questions we've got provided on the practice tab. Now, remembering all the skills you need to master can be difficult and daunting, and I don't recommend you do it. It's much better for you to be measuring your progress actually by actually testing your performance in answering questions in each of the categories that the ACT presents, rather than trying to study in the abstract what it means to do data interpretation. Really, just do questions that are testing data interpretation and see how you do. Try to improve that score by reflecting on why you get the questions you get wrong. And we got solution videos for the vast majority of our ACT science problems that are going to lead you in the right direction if you get any of those questions wrong. Um, also, testing experience employing all the skills simultaneously is key. So don't expect to not see a specific skill in a supposedly different section type. All of these skills are useful for answering all sorts of ACT science test questions. So um, the way that Testive is going to break up this section is we're going to keep the ACT format. We're going to break them down by the ACT science test passage category, since at the end of the day, all of the skills that you're practicing are going to be useful for answering any sort of question provided you. So just consider a previous data interpretation question. What am I talking about when I say that you need to use all these sorts of different skills at the same time? So this is a data interpretation question, which required you to interpret graphic and tabular material. So yes, you need to interpret what the graph and what the table here is saying, but you also need to understand the design of the experiment, which was part of a different category, and identify the relevant factors that are going to control the outcome of the data that's actually on the table for you to even understand the question that's being asked of you. So these are skills spanning at least two ACT categories, and thinking of them separately is just not conducive to you doing too well. I guess on the exam, you'll do much better if you're used to pulling from all sorts of skills that you need for answering questions for this test. So rather than rule out the use of other skills per question type, you need to get practice pulling from a wealth of them, wealth of the measure of the skills that are measured by this test. So uh, that means that it's going to be really important for all these question types to do one thing, and that is dissecting the essay, really making sure that you understand what the text is talking about and that you do it quickly so that you can get to the questions that are associated to it. So before approaching any multiple choice questions, read and understand the passage. Even if you think you know from all of your years of studying science that it's really obvious that the answer to question 3 will be B, you do not know what curveball they may have thrown at you in the passage. So make sure that you read and understand that. And be on the lookout for the hypothesis the author is furthering. It's usually not that difficult to find for this sort of question, which is great relief for those of you that struggle finding thesis statements in ACT reading questions, for example. But it's important to just keep in mind the same sort of questions. What is the passage about? And keep that simple. What's just a general topic we're discussing? For the previous question, we were, sort of discussing forces and how they affect the motion of this ball. Just that simple. What is it about? And then once you've got an idea of what we're talking about, focus on identifying the main idea. So what is the author trying to explain or discover the reasons for? Why is this experiment being carried out in the first place? And then locate and mark the hypothesis. As I said, it's usually easy, it's usually clearly labeled, but it's still a good idea for you to mark it. And if you cannot find it, that is a good indication that you haven't really understood what the passage is showing you. You shouldn't go back and reread the passage. Really, you should read very carefully and slowly to maximize the amount of questions that you'll answer without needing to waste time by reading and reading and reading the passage over again. Um, watch out for distractors in the introduction. A lot of the time for these, they're going to tell you something about the concept that the experiment is contributing to in general, or that well, whatever sort of science passage you're presented with is contributing to in general, but it's not really going to be the purpose of the experiment itself, to answer the big questions that may be in the introductory paragraph. And then, of course, look at what data we are looking for. in order to back up whatever hypothesis is furthered. And well, does the data we have really back up that hypothesis, or is it maybe not enough evidence to have that hypothesis? If it's just a question, what hypothesis does the data lead us to conclude has to be the correct hypothesis? And watch out for assumptions in doing that. It can be sort of complicated. And well, and how do you help yourself out with this? Label the data provided on the diagram if there is a diagram. And if there isn't, draw yourself one. It's very important for you to label and to keep not only the textual evidence, but really a mental image of what you're talking about as you go through it. This is going to help you distinguish relevant from irrelevant information to a specific question. And what pieces of evidence does the experimenter use to back up her hypothesis, of course, is the essence of why you're doing this. This is the most important question to be asking. What are the results of the experiment, and what do they say about the hypothesis that the experimenter is furthering? So these skills, like you can see, are much like those you need to dissect English or reading test question passages. And well, why is that? This is just another essay. It's another way of writing, and it's testing maybe slightly different skills, whatever these scientific reasoning skills the ACT is referring to are, but the strategies to answer happen to be very similar. Um, you have to keep in mind, while this isn't a reading comprehension test, and you shouldn't necessarily think about it that way, 100% as a reading comprehension test, understanding the passage provided is key to selecting the best answer choice. So a lot of those skills are transferable. And this isn't merely a graph reading test. If you think from just looking at that example question that all of these questions have graphs. Many of them don't. Many of them don't have tables. Even though graphic and tabular interpretation is important, you need to approach this like any other reading passage. So think, what is this experiment testing? And for what purpose? So why? Why are we doing this? Why is this text being written at all? What are we reporting if it's more of a report on an experiment that was already carried out, or on a series of experiments that have been carried out by multiple people? Why are we talking about this? And just also remember that this is the most unforgiving ACT test in terms of time, which means practice is key. The only way that you can develop the stamina to do well in this section is by doing problems in this section over and over and over again. And as with all ACT tests, the difficult questions are going to be interspersed with the easier ones. So don't feel that you're starting out with easier questions and finishing with harder ones, or vice versa. And there's no penalty for getting a wrong response. So attempting all questions is in your best interest. Guessing is better than leaving a question blank if you know you won't have time to come back to it. If you struggle understanding an essay, do read it once again before jumping to the questions it is paired with. But really, you should be at the point where you, by the time that you're taking the test, where you're reading carefully enough that you do not have to um, reread. It should be after enough practice. You should be at a level where you're reading slowly, carefully, and if you have to reread, you didn't read carefully enough. So go back and read it again, but for the next question, take your time to read slowly and carefully, even though this is timed, as unforgivingly as it is. It's just reading efficiently is a skill that you're going to need to develop for this section. Um, I'm not going to say good luck for the section. We're going to give you a good fortune, and this fortune is very good because it tells you you will be rewarded for your efforts. It really is a matter of you will perform better and better if you put in more and more practice. This isn't a matter of luck. So I'm giving you this good fortune. And now, if you would like to try one of these problems on your own, I'm going to leave a problem here up on the screen, and the answer will be provided on the next video in this series um, within a week from now. And that question is the following. It is a long question, like many of the questions provided in the ACT Science. So if you need to pause your video here and really think about it, make this video full screen or whatever you need to do to read the passage and try to answer the questions. Do whatever you need to do. And the answer choice will be provided and the question discussed a little bit in the following video. I hope that you found this video useful, and stick with us for the next few videos that we have got here in store for you. Good fortune.